Awesome. Well, let's dive in. I'm sure everyone is super excited to hear about our content today, Making It Rain, Mastering Second Level Sales Leadership with the one and only Pete Kazanjy. But
Woo!
before we begin, I'd love to talk about MSP.
Yeah.
So today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. I am one of the event community managers at Modern Sales Pros. And for those who are not familiar, MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supported disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for 27K and growing members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they might not know about. We do this through great live sessions like the one you're about to experience today, through our online robust forum, and in-person events. So those of you who are not previously admitted should now have access to the community. And if you don't, please drop our team a note at Modern Sales HQ, and I'll drop the link right here. Our website is amazing. We have a ton of great resources, and definitely check out our content track on data-driven sales management. And I'll also drop that link here. If you want to see more of Pete's webinars, please check that out. He has a ton of great stuff there.
Oh yeah.
And before we dive into the content, let's go over some housekeeping notes. So if you have a question for Pete, please use the Q&A function next to the chat poll docs function at the top right-hand corner. We'll be sure to get them during the event. And yes, this event is being recorded, so if you have a colleague or friend that missed out on it, don't you worry. We'll be sending you the key takeaways and recording, and also Pete's amazing slide deck at the end of the event. Now to our awesome sponsor, Atrium. I'm actually going to pass it off to Pete to introduce Atrium himself and go over the agenda, and I'll be back for closing notes. Pete, take it away.
Thank you, Angelica. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. I'm super pumped to be talking about second level data-driven second level sales leadership. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Just really quickly, for those who may not be familiar with Atrium, we are the sponsor of today's MSP event. So Atrium makes data-driven sales management software whose sole purpose is to help sales organizations, so managers, leaders, et cetera, use data to improve team performance. And one of the things that's really super rad about Atrium is super easy to set up. You just log in with your Salesforce credentials, and within 5 minutes, Atrium will show you how your reps and your teams are performing across hundreds of metrics, and tell you all sorts of important stuff about what's going on, like what's going right, also what's going wrong. And the reason why it's maybe what's going wrong is more important is because that allows us to dive in there and fix the things that are going wrong, so we can change performance for the better going forward. So that's a little bit on Atrium. Today, what we're going to be talking about is data and metrics for the second level sales leader, and kind of like the different ways that you as a sales leader ought to be infusing your data, infusing your own operating rhythm, but also infusing your organization with data. A little bit of background on me. I'm the founder of Atrium. I'm also the previously started and sold a software company called TalentBin, a recruiting software company that I started in 2011, was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and then subsequent to that, started Modern Sales Pros, also started Atrium, and then wrote a book on sales, on startup sales, called Founding Sales. Actually, I have a copy of it right here. It turns out fun. So that's a little bit on me. So I think about sales, think about data-driven sales management and startup sales just a little bit. One of the things that we wanted to offer to everybody who's here today, one of the things that we like to do at Atrium is help our customers be better. Be better, but also be better with respect to data-driven sales management and things like that. That's literally what Atrium focuses on, but also help our customers be better at management in general, sales management, and outside of data things and metrics things. And so that's why one of the things that we do is we actually host a sales management boot camp, and with Richard Harris, who's a fantastic sales trainer. we're going to go ahead and drop the link to sign up for that. It's complimentary for, we actually started out doing it with Atrium customers and then started inviting the community as well. It's complimentary for sales managers, sales leaders, sales operations folks, things like that. Normally this sort of thing, it's a half-day boot camp, so normally this sort of thing would probably cost like $1,000. Not probably, I know that it would cost like $1,000 or more, but in our case, it's complimentary for our customers and also for folks who are in our community. And so yeah, if you guys want to go ahead and sign up for that, you can do so. There's a little QR code right there as well. So without further ado, I think what I'm going to actually do here is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Sorry, stop sharing those slides, and I'm going to jump over here to screen share here. Wonderful, cool. So let's talk about data-driven sales leadership. So there's kind of like 3 major reasons why it's important to be a data-driven leader. And so what we're going to talk about is kind of like 3 big buckets of that. But the important thing is, one, that in a modern sales organization, data can be the eyes and ears to help sales leadership see around corners. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here. Secondarily, instilling that throughout the business creates high performing managers who drive results quarter after quarter. And then importantly, a focus on data is really the future of modern sales management. And so realistically, like sales is having kind of like its Moneyball moment right now, where it's extremely important for a sales leadership and to enable their sales management to be data driven. And so we're going to talk about kind of like 3 major topics here today. 1, metrics that are specifically for the modern sales leader. 2, metrics for the managers that they serve, because that's the most important thing as a sales leader, is making sure that the managers that report to you are having success and are properly enabled. And then 3 is metrics for reps that they lead. And so so first, let's go ahead and talk about metrics for the leaders themselves. And so what we're going to kind of talk about here is the notion of like the metrics that leaders should particularly be paying attention to themselves. And so what that's going to be focused on here is, 1, line of sight revenue, so things that you can actually kind of see coming down the pike, or alternatively not see, if and being aware of that. 2nd, what I call revenue next, so like the next set of revenue that should be coming down the pike. 3rd, rep productivity, or what we like to call the fingerprint of success. So understanding at a rep level, averages and on a rep level, like if people are aligning to those averages, and then kind of alerting on that. So let's go ahead and talk about the first section here. So line of sight revenue. And so this essentially is just like metrics that you should pay attention to for yourself as a leader. And so the first thing there is going to be pretty basic. It's just going to be totals, like team totals. And so these are actually a couple of like, screenshots here of examples out of Atrium. And so what this is going to be things like totals of wins or bookings. Obviously, those are pretty straightforward, but also other kind of like totals as well. So like, total opportunity ownership across your organization, total pipeline ownership, total new opportunity inflow, and kind of things like that. So that's the first thing, is like essentially, what are we paying attention to these totals of kind of like key metrics that are important for us, and then ideally are they going up and to the right? Right. Then next, what we're going to be talking about is kind of other things that leaders should be paying attention to. And then of course, like probably the most basic thing there would be like the forecast. And so what that means is like paying attention to at least the total, both the total, and then also on a per rep basis, what revenue is coming down the pike. And so really what that just means is like, pipeline or opportunity ownership that is scheduled to close. So based on close dates, right? Scheduled to close in various months, quarters, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, these are forward-looking, right? Forward-looking based on the close dates there. And so that's just essentially like forecasting 101, pretty basic. But if you're not doing it, you're gonna have a bad time. And so doing that organizationally from a total standpoint, and then also doing that from a rep basis individually is both important from a forecasting standpoint. So like, how are our reps doing? Like how much pipeline do they have scheduled to close this quarter, right? So then we can get to actually more advanced forecasting. And so this can be a variety. This can be done a variety of different ways. One of the ways that organizations do this with Atrium is to use, we have a number of kind of advanced KPIs that use historical win rate conversions in order to discount the existing pipeline in a given organization's pipe by the historical win rates of those reps, right, on a per stage basis. And so what this can do is this can help a manager understand, or a leader understand in aggregate, right? Not just like how much pipeline do I have, and are we going to be like, is it 3x? Great, but instead in a crisper basis, understand what is the likelihood that that pipeline is going to close based on the historical win rate associated with that historically. And so that can be a very powerful thing to understand, like, are we going to get to our number from an actual like statistically significant standpoint, as opposed to, just kind of like shooting from the hip, et cetera. And again, you can do that on a per rep basis as well. Wonderful. And then, of course, there's a kind of a more advanced version of this is essentially like a pipeline waterfall, where essentially what you can see is like, hey, here's where we started from a pipeline standpoint at the beginning of the quarter. Here's what has grown. Here's what's closed won. Here's what's closed lost. Here's what's pushed out. And then here's how much pipeline is still remaining like still in the tank, if you will. And so these are all kind of like important ways of putting arms around what I like to call line of sight revenue and how we're tracking towards that. Just so like, in quarter, you can understand that things are proceeding the way that you would anticipate them to proceed. And if they're not, if you, potentially redirect. And so that's where kind of, if they're not, goes to kind of notions of alerting. Right. And so good examples of this would be actually one of the things that makes Atrium fairly differentiated is the fact that the software monitors all these KPIs and will throw, alerting at a leader, at a manager, what have you, if there is a key delta in an important KPI that has shifted, like in this case, like pipeline ownership. So that would be a good example of something that it was very impactful for line of sight revenue. And so knowing that, pipeline ownership has compressed substantially on a per rep basis would actually be a pretty powerful thing to be aware of there. Wonderful. So that's what we call kind of revenue, line of sight revenue. The next thing is going to be what I like to refer to as revenue next. And so the important thing there is, like, if you think about like what goes into the forecast, this is a little kind of like counterintuitive for a lot of folks, is that the forecast, even though it's like kind of forward looking, it actually, and it's like at least better than just looking at like what is actually closed. The funny thing about the forecast is that it's actually a little bit backwards looking as well. You might say like, wait a minute, Pete, that's super confusing. These are deals that are forecast to close this month or next month or the month after that or the month after that. Yeah, true. But if you think about where those close dates and where those deals came from, they actually were born, if you will, even further in advance, right? So even though they're forecast and you're looking forward to see that, this aggregation of them is going to close this month or next month or the month after that, the reality is that you can get even further ahead of that and comprehend like where the inputs to that forecast are coming from and keep an eye on that. And so that's really, really, really important as a leader, is like your forecast could can deteriorate or potentially be kneecapped by deficits of inputs to that forecast. And so that's what I like to call revenue next, which is things like new opportunity inflow, right? So how many ops are coming into the pipe of your reps, maybe on a total basis or on a per rep basis or what have you? How much pipeline has made it to a certain stage, right? So even if you're like most organizations, you're probably not putting very crisp amounts, like forecasted amounts, onto deals until they get to a certain stage. Well, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to those deals before they reach that stage. It just means that like we should be paying attention to them and we should be measuring those, because that's going to give us a sense of what proportion of those may turn into forecasted deals and so on and so forth. So good examples of this would be total opportunities created, total opportunity, like, new opportunity inflow, etc. The next version, kind of more sophisticated version of this would be like what we like to call here at Atrium pipeline at stage. So it's one thing if you have, pipeline, right? Or pipeline that has like made it past, SAO, right? Sales accepted opportunity. The problem is that as pipeline gets further along and progresses through stages, it's becoming more and more likely that it's going to win. So as a result, paying attention to how much pipeline has made it to a given stage, maybe that's discovery, maybe that's your like stage 2, or maybe that is like proof of value, right? Maybe it's after a POC or something like that, or maybe it's actually even getting towards commercials, like getting to a proposal or like a negotiation stage or what have you. But the point being that making sure that you're monitoring those, like how much pipeline is actually making it towards or to those stages can be a very powerful way of understanding what our revenue next might look like. And that's probably not going to be this quarter, right? It's not going to be this month. It's probably not going to be, it might not even be this quarter, because if your deal cycle is longer than 60 days, the reality is that like, the pipeline you enter a quarter with, like 2/3 of it is going to be closed and is like, sorry, 2/3 of the pipeline that is like eligible for that quarter is already in the pipe when you start that quarter. And so paying attention to revenue next, ahead of that quarter, or like in our current quarter thinking about next quarter, is a very powerful way of making sure that we're tracking appropriately, or you're going to have a nasty surprise 90 days out, 120 days out, 180 days out, et cetera, et cetera. And then even ahead of things, before it makes it into AE land, is paying attention if you have an SDR organization, or even if you don't have an SDR organization and you have a and your AEs are full cycle, paying attention to those prospecting activities is going to be a leading indicator for revenue next as well. Because guess what? Like, where does new opportunity inflow come from? It doesn't just fall from the sky. Oops. It doesn't just fall from the sky. It comes, generally speaking, it comes from some sort of activity, whether it's outbound activity or, activity facing inbound leads and what have you. So paying attention to SDR or prospecting leading indicators, like with metrics like total accounts interacted with, or a really important metric that most organizations don't pay attention to is essentially the SDR equivalent of new opportunity inflow. But instead of it being new opportunity inflow, it's new accounts that net new accounts that SDRs are interacting with for the first time, right? Essentially, it's inflow, right? New inventory that's coming in that's being interacted with by the SDRs, or AEs who are prospecting. Because if you're only interacting with the same accounts, right, and you don't have new inflow happening, that's going to negatively impact your ability to create opportunities. Similarly, paying attention to like email engagement rates, so like responsiveness there, crossing these two together is generally speaking going to give you a measure of the amount of opportunity creation that you would anticipate coming out of the back of this part of the machine here. Cool. So that's revenue next there. It's kind of fun. So then, as a leader, the other thing that it's incumbent on you to pay attention to is, if you have managers who are under you, which is generally what we're going to use to define as a leader, you're not going to be you can't really spend your time paying attention to individual reps. There's just too many of them. Like if you've got 20 or 40 or 80 or 200 reps, that's what the managers are for. That said, understanding what the fingerprint of success looks like for your organization for a given rep, and then making sure that your managers are able to measure that appropriately and hold those folks to account for that, is a really powerful thing. And so I'm going to give you some examples of what that might look like in practice here. So kind of similar metrics to what we were talking about above around line of sight revenue next, et cetera, but instead of it being looking at totals, right? Instead of looking at totals, we're looking at averages. And the reason why is because that's what we're going to do, is we're going to use the average in order to say, hey, this is how many, like as an example here, this is how many new business opportunities our AEs should have in their pipe at any given point in time. So in this case, it's like, hey, these AEs, the expectation is that they should have anywhere between 20 to 40 opportunities that are in their pipe at any given point in time. And this is like, you can kind of see this team was overloaded previously, it fell off, and now they're in kind of like a sweet spot here, right between 20 and 40. But importantly, not every rep is at the same level there. And so this is why having this information cross within the per rep information, and again, the leader is not going to be spending his or her time paying attention to this. It's probably not a great use of their time if they've like this, but instead what we have is we have our managers, right? Like AE manager 1, AE manager 2, SDR manager 1, SDR manager 2. They are paying attention to this, right? But importantly, they're paying attention to this right here, and we know that where we ought to be is between 20 to 40. These folks right here are kind of at the top, and maybe that's probably like overloading them. And then these people down here are kind of at the bottom. And so in this case, we might make course adjustments as a manager. We would say, hey, these guys maybe need to be taken off the round robin. They're probably overloaded right here. Similarly, we probably want to prioritize these folks right here. And so that can be applied to any manner of metric, right? Important kind of like fingerprint of success metric here. So like, for instance, the new business win rate in this example, we expect it to be greater than 20%. Had a little bit of a dip here, kind of making it back. And then of course you can kind of see the blend between these different reps. Like this rep right here really kind of hitting the cover off the ball. These reps down here seem to indicate that their managers really need to get involved in their deals and kind of help coach them, because their win rate is dramatically lower than the rest of the team here. Cool. Same with, and then this goes all the way down to, like, we're talking about opportunity ownership here, which is like pretty basic. Win rate is like, yeah, it's a little bit more sophisticated. I'm not going to call it super basic, but more sophisticated, but also kind of like meat and potatoes. This can go all the way down to, it ought to go all the way down to things like customer facing meeting volumes. And the reason why is, as a leader, one of the things you should be focused on is rep productivity. And when people think about rep productivity, oftentimes what they think about is like, oh, like how much bookings am I getting out of them eventually, like at the end of a quarter. And that's fine, but you have to think about the productivity of the inputs as well. And so, as with respect to reps, literally what they do is they spend their days talking on the phone with customers, having Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever meetings, right? Sending emails, and writing up proposals and putting decks together and things like that. I mean, that's like a prototypical behavior, a set of behaviors for like a mid-market kind of like B2B sales rep. And so that means making sure that our reps have their calendars full with customer facing meetings is a really important leading indicator of rep productivity, because if we have reps who don't have enough customer facing meetings on the calendar, well, what are we doing with their salary expense? And so this, as you as a leader, need to be paying attention to this and saying, hey, we expect our reps to be having anywhere between, for example, 50 to 70 customer facing meetings a month. And again, you can kind of see the deltas here, right? You can see, wow, these guys right here really are, I don't know what they're putting in their Wheaties. Maybe they need to chill out a little bit. And then in this case, it seems like there's an opportunity for more pipe gen here, and more and better utilization, because in the trailing 30 days, these folks are at the, in the 17 to kind of 30 range, where we should be at 50 to 70, right? And so this is an example again of, hey, we've got our fingerprint of success with respect to a key metric that matters, that we as a leader care about organizationally, and then we have the ability, again, probably not for us as a leader, but instead for our managers, to be able to bird dog this and say, are we at the levels that we need to be at here, or are we not? And we need to, again, intervene and like change behavior in order to drive better performance here. And the same is true of kind of like average selling price. You can do this approach, the fingerprint of success approach. You can and ought do this fingerprint of success approach for any metric that matters to your organization. Cool. So next, let's talk about what we like to call like alerting, right? And so as a leader, it's going to be pretty hard. Like, you're super busy with, one-on-ones, probably with your managers. You're probably interfacing with a lot of your other peers in the organization, a lot of meetings with marketing, a lot of meetings with customer success, a lot of board meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So being in the metrics yourself may oftentimes be challenging, which is why having alerting that will let you know when something has changed with a team can be very powerful. So again, we're not caring about the individual reps. That's at the manager level. So the fact that Bobby's win rate has fallen off, or the fact that Susie's customer facing meeting volume is way higher than all her peers, that's fantastic for a manager, an SDR manager, an AE manager. That's not something that a leader, a second level leader, is really ought to be spending their calories on. But team level alerts, like something has changed with the team, that's something that actually is pretty impactful and important. So these could be positive things like, hey, look, you said that you were that customer or that raising average selling prices is an important thing for the organization, and that was an initiative last quarter, and then lo and behold, look at that, average selling price has risen as appropriate, right? Or the kind of example that we said earlier, new pipeline ownership has declined across the entire account executive team, or customer facing meetings on the calendar. All of these things are really important, that you as a leader would want to be aware of the fact that, wow, my AE team is having 50% more customer facing meetings than usual. That's great, because we were talking about the importance of rep productivity for that the other day, right? And then the last example here is really just paying attention to, like, using these things for like board meetings or like quarterly business reviews for your for your teams. Cool. So those are all the things that we want to be paying attention to as a leader. So that's like self-serving. So as a leader, I care about totals. As a leader, I care about fingerprint of success. As a leader, I care about things that are changing. But that's just for you. And a, almost a more important thing as a leader is that you should be using this information for your team, for your managers. So setting your managers up for success, because the same way that when you go from being a rep to being a manager, the behaviors change very substantially. You can't be in the business of closing deals for your reps. You can't be in the business of like riding along on every single call, because you've got 6 reps or 8 reps riding, or like having 3 or 4 calls a day. Um, and so instead, what you should be doing is using leverage as a manager. Similarly, when you become a leader, you are now in the business not of managing reps, but instead of enabling the managers that report to you to be more successful. And so what we're going to talk about here is how you can set up a data-driven management motion that enables those managers to be successful. Um, that enables those managers to be successful without you, without you being up in their grill. And so the way that we kind of describe this here at Atrium is we use the phrase sales managers matter. And the kind of the reason why, and you don't have to trust us about this, high performing managers end up being the substantial difference between sales organizations that are mediocre or underperforming, and then those that have quite a bit of success. And this is something, like, you don't have to believe me. Gartner talks about this. My friend Michelle Vazana, the author of Crushing Quota, phenomenal book on sales management, talks about this as well. In fact, actually, the data-driven coaching masterclass that I've done for MSP previously kind of talks about this. But the point is that if you make your managers more powerful, they're going to drive better success for your organization across a variety of vectors. And probably the biggest vector is going to be this one right here, where their reps end up being more likely to be top performers, because what they do is they take reps who are middle of the pack and they move them up, right? Once you have a top performer, it's very difficult to get like more juice out of a top performer, because again, there's only like 40 or 50 hours in a week, and they're probably already doing a great job there. Where there's more opportunity for execution is going to be for the folks who are in the middle of the pack, just moving those 3, 4, 5 reps who are in the middle of the pack on their 8-person team, moving them up 10 or 20 or 30% there. And the way that you do that is through better hands-on management that ideally is data-driven. And so the mechanisms by which sales managers ought to be doing this is by doing a variety of management behaviors that are important. Unfortunately, only some of them actually end up getting done. And so these are kind of the different capabilities that these managers should be spending their time doing. Deal inspection and strategy, of course, is kind of the number one thing that managers spend a lot of their time doing. Um, but it's not the only thing, right? They should be tracking progress towards goals. They should be having not just one-on-ones, but database one-on-ones. They should be monitoring the new hire of their. They should be monitoring new hire ramp, and then importantly, they should be identifying issues and fixing them, and then standardizing the success of top performers. And so the problem here is that they managers are not really enabled to do this, and this is your job as a leader, is to help managers do this. And the reason why is because, one, most managers are recently promoted reps, right? Whether it's SDR managers or AE managers, and the same amount of like enablement resources that we put into reps unfortunately don't go into managers. And then secondarily, the thing that they're given in order to like have to like to manage end up being general purpose analytics solutions that are for analysts and not really for managers. And so the problem associated, and this becomes all the more important, like better management becomes all the more important in times when of kind of economic wobbliness, where one, you can't just like add more and more and more reps. Efficiency ends up being really important. Fast and healthy ramps end up being important. Like, you can't have 12-month ramps where reps aren't, kind of slowly making their way up to success. And then moreover, from a pipe gen standpoint, every opportunity ends up being very precious. And so managing those ends up being really important. And so all of these things can be monitored via, metric. So what do they end up typically doing? Looking at deals. And so this right here is not a high leverage way of spending your time as a manager. And so as a leader, what you need to do is you need to help them do these things right here across their operating rhythm, because if you don't help them do these things right here, they're going to spend all their time doing these things right here, and then you're going to have negative impacts associated with that. So what this is a little bit of an advertisement for Atrium. What our claim would be is that managers, that sales management is such an important craft, at sales management, SDR management, et cetera, is such an important craft that it's worth its own set of specific software that is designed for this, that has all the KPIs that you could want as a rep, or sorry, as a manager, tracking progress towards goals, giving you early warning alerting on things for your issues for your reps, and then helping you do performance diagnosis just automatically for you. And the reason why you want to use data to do this is because it's the way to get leverage, mainly insofar as riding along on calls is like really low leverage. It's important, but the right calls with the right reps, right? Obviously, closing deals for your reps is extremely low leverage. That's the path to kind of insanity. There's only one of you. You probably have 6 or 8 reps. Instead, helping our reps be more successful is the more important thing there. And then all of this is just made more difficult through kind of remote or hybrid situations. And so the way to do this more successfully is to make sure that you have an operating rhythm in place that is infused with data that is set up for your managers, right? So like not relying on them to come up with this, but instead saying, hey, you know what, across our 3 AE teams, or our 2 AE teams, or 3 AE teams, or our 2 SDR teams, this is the set of meetings. These are the agendas that we use for that. This is the content that are in those meetings that then is being consumed and distributed. And then these are the metrics that are associated with this. And so this is an example of kind of some, some example meetings for an operating rhythm, whether it's pipeline review, one-on-ones. Again, a one-on-one that is not a pipeline review, is not a deal strategy meeting, but instead is a coaching one-on-one that pays attention to metrics, QBR meetings, etc. This is kind of an example of what an operating rhythm could look like in practice. You got your different kind of meetings with their relevant agendas. This is like a month here. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. Sales team meetings on Mondays, got stand-ups throughout the week, got our one-on-ones. So got our pipeline review here, got our one-on-ones here. These are not pipeline reviews. These are different types of one-on-ones, et cetera. And this is just an example of what that might look like in practice. Every single one of those events should have should have an agenda, should have a structure to it. So this is an example of what an agenda might look like, and then moreover a recurring meeting, and a recurring agenda that has kind of tie back structure in place, where you have like the different topics that you're covering, but then you can create a next meeting, right? So you just copy it off, like this meeting's date, this meeting's date, this meeting's date. And so what that does is allows for you to, like, one, these are the things that we're working on in our, with me as a manager and this rep right here. These are the metrics that we're looking at. This is what we're managing right now, et cetera, et cetera. This right here, this structure should apply to all of the kind of your operating rhythm, right? So like your sales team meeting should have an agenda, like a template agenda, but then you can then fork off on I do it on Sunday night, but like fork off for the next day. And right now, like this is a hallmark of second level leadership, that sales team meeting agenda with respect to my organization, because at this point I have 2 sales managers, an SDR manager, a VP of marketing. Everybody's kind of coming into that agenda that has been forked, and they're filling out their parts of the meeting using the associated metrics. In this case, they're hyperlinked off to Atrium, Atrium views and what have you. So they all come into that, fill it all out, and then come Monday at 11 o'clock, boom, we're just jamming through that meeting, and everybody's aware of what's going on. We're getting ahead of potential issues, et cetera. And so having that systematized across all of your operating rhythm is a way to make sure that your managers are going to be having success rather than relying on them to come up with these things on their own. The second thing that you should be thinking about with respect, aside from an operating rhythm and kind of infusing data into that, is making sure that you've set kind of good goals. And this kind of goes back to this example and this concept of the fingerprint of success here. Understanding like what good goals look like, not just from an output standpoint, but also from an input standpoint as well, is a really important thing. So like things like how many customer facing meetings should my reps be having, how many new opportunities should be flowing into their pipe, et cetera, et cetera. And so the mechanisms by which you should set these goals, and we have a whole master class that we do on setting and managing goals, that maybe I think actually Angelica might be able to drop into the chat here. But when you're doing goal setting, you kind of want to blend together a variety of approaches to kind of get to reasonable, attainable, and kind of like data informed goals. The approach here is one, use historical performance in order to kind of look at your middle of the pack, your upper middle reps, and then set set goals kind of based on that. Also, what you can do is you can do bottoms up, and say like, hey, look, what ought my reps be doing, right? What should they be spending their time on? Like use Atrium as an example. I'm sitting on our sales floor right now. 7 of our reps are on calls right now. That's what they should be doing, right? Prep for a call takes 15 minutes. Follow up for a call maybe takes like 15 to 30 minutes because we have a pretty standard B2B sales motion where there's discovery recaps that need to be put together, mutual plan software that needs to be filled out, et cetera, et cetera. So you take that information and then you model it out over what a week would look like, and use that information to say, cool, this amount of time for customer facing meetings, prep and follow up, this amount of time for pipeline management, this amount of time for like inbox management, et cetera, et cetera. This is how many. And so based on that, this is how many this is how many meetings they can probably be handling. This is how many opportunities they probably can handle based on those meeting counts, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all kind of, that's like how to do bottoms up modeling there. You can also use benchmarks too, if you can get access to that data. Typically pretty tough to do. In our case, because we have a few hundred customers, we're able to do that benchmarking for our customers and kind of blend that together. But these are kind of some examples of what that might look like in practice. So these are some examples of like suggested account executive goals for things as kind of straightforward as meetings and emails, to maybe new opportunity inflow, to total opportunity ownership. This is where things are gonna get like highly variable depending on your sales motion. And the same can kind of be true with like SDRs as well. It's like depending on the level of automation that might be in place, the email volumes or call volumes might be different, but in general, these are these are some ideas of things that you might want to set goals on, and then also what they might what some of those levels might look like there. Cool. So lastly, what we're going to talk about here is the situations wherein a sales leader might might want to be paying attention to individual reps. And so examples of that would be, in general, you don't want to be in the business. Again, this is using the term sales leader to mean somebody who manages managers. Generally speaking, you're not going to be at the rep, like you're not going to be spending your time at the rep level, except in certain situations where it's really, really important to be doing, to where there's a certain kind of point in a rep's existence where something might matter. And so these are kind of some examples of that. Might be ramping is a great example of that, key initiatives, and then what we like to refer to as strategy insights here. I'm going to kind of take you through both of those. So one, let's talk about ramping. So ramping, of course, is making sure that like our reps are having success, that they're trending upwards as they're after their new hire. And so this is some examples of what that looks like in practice. Atrium has some pretty sweet functionality that allows you to see that essentially allows you to baseline your all your reps at the kind of their start date, and then have it build up over time here. And so being able to bird dog that in order to say, wow, look at these reps down here, and the fact that they're kind of like ramping a little bit slowly, that should, as a leader, that should give you pause. And yes, your manager should be paying attention to this, but because this is such a high criticality thing to be paying attention to, because like ramp is so key, it's probably worth it for you as a manager, a leader, to be backing up those managers in that regard. And so a great way of doing this, of course, is with anomaly detection. This is why this sort of thing is built into Atrium, to help you understand, like, do you have reps who are, ramping ahead of schedule? Alternatively, do you have reps that are like maybe ramping behind schedule? These are things that you as a manager would want to be, sorry, you as a leader might want to be bird dogging there. Secondarily, you might have key initiatives, right? So let's say that there's a key initiative that's in place that you're systematizing across your entire organization. Examples that we see in our customers all the time might be, hey, we need our account executives to be doing more prospecting. It's a pretty common case. So you're saying, hey, we want our teams to be prospecting more. And then because this is a high level initiative, this is an important thing that I as a leader have kind of like put out there. Yes, my managers are going to be managing it, but because it's a high criticality thing, I as a leader might be paying attention to it as well, right? And so that's where that would matter, not just at a team level, but also at a rep level as well. So the manager, again, a leader can be backing up his or her managers for a very specific use case here. In this case, the the key initiative around prospecting. And then lastly, a thing that can be important, and this is like a new thing, because there is software like Atrium that exists now that can do analysis on on reps, right? Can do actual, like, not just visualization, but actually do analysis and diagnosis of individual reps and their sales motion. That can be a situation where, as a leader, you can again be a backup to your manager and say, hey, did you see this? Right? Like, did you see this? And then what are we going to do about it? Right? So like backing up that manager. And so these are kind of some examples of this. These are what we call strategy insights here at Atrium, where essentially what Atrium does, it looks at a variety of metrics. If you guys want to get better at this, a good example, like we have these laminates, metrics inspection laminates here, which actually maybe we can drop a link in the chat if folks want to get a copy of these bad boys. They're pretty awesome. But what Atrium does is it looks at all these metrics for you, and sees if there's any issues. So as an example, this rep right here is 50% light with respect to his bookings over the trailing 90 days. And what Atrium is noting is that the reason why is because his win rate is lower, right? He has a lower win rate and a lower ASP, even though his deal cycle is faster. And his opportunity counts are fine. Similarly, this rep right here is driving 30% more bookings than his peers, and the reason why is because his sales cycle is faster. His his ASP is higher, et cetera, et cetera. Cool. And so this is kind of what that looks like in practice there. This is like a more blown out version of that. So in this case, the software is doing this analysis for you. And so like it's bringing this to the manager, but then this is one of the things that we talk about with respect to Atrium is you want to be spending your time fixing problems more than you are looking for problems. And so in this case, because the problems have been identified for you, now as a leader, what you can do is you and your manager, who is responsible for that rep can spend your time saying, hey, what are we going to do about this rep right here? And the fact that he's got a 20% lower win rate than his peers, right? Like how are we going to fix that together? Um, and in order to remediate this. And so again, this is, as a leader, generally speaking, you don't want to be too far into the weeds with respect to your with respect to the individual reps that are on teams there. But there are high criticality situations wherein backing up your managers and then working with them in order to tackle the problems that are revealed within their teams is a very good use of leadership time there. Wonderful. So those are all the slides that we wanted to cover today. I'm going to get into some of the Q&A that has been showing up here. Kind of, it's been like popping up in my eyes over here in the corner, so I am going to get to it. What I will note is that a really impactful thing for sales managers. So if like you have sales managers, making sure that they are capable of having productive coaching conversations, good one-on-ones, good operating rhythms, things like that. This sales management boot camp that we put on for with Richard Harris here, this complimentary sales management bootcamp is an extremely powerful thing for those managers. If you'd like to either go yourself or invite your managers, what have you, you're welcome to do so. We're going to drop the link here. You can use the QR code there. So what I'm going to do, cool. All right, I'm going to answer some questions here. So Paolo says, how do you apply advanced forecasting to a startup that does not have much historic data? I mean, I think, Paolo, the answer to your question there is, you have to make do with the data that you do have. Ideally, and I did a session on this the other day around, scaling startups. Ideally, you should be in an environment where you do have some historical data from either founder selling or existing rep behavior. So even just like using the existing win rates in order to spend your to kind of forecast forward is better than not doing anything there. Let me get over here to the chat and look for. There's a question on manager enablement here. What's the best way to kind of do this? What I find is so one, setting up that operating rhythm so the managers are set up for success. And just being very prescriptive around that can be very powerful. The other thing that can be really helpful there is making sure that you have a recurring sales leadership team meeting, like an SLT meeting. Mine is for 30 minutes at the beginning of Mondays. In order for me, my VP of sales, and our sales manager to align, kind of talk about any like high criticality things and like flag bugs that are popping up. That can be a really great way. Like that's like manager enablement hour, if you will. Right? We actually have a rep enablement hour, so we have an hour from 4 to 5 on Mondays that is like dedicated for rep enablement. You got to make sure that you're doing the same thing with your managers. Right. The joke that we say here at Atrium is calendar is destiny. And so if you're not putting time on the calendar in order to help your sales managers, and so that would mean like a place to like discuss things with those sales managers, you're probably going to have a tough time there because they're just going to continue to shoot from the hip. Wonderful. So I think unless there's any other questions, want to thank everybody for joining us today. Oh, hi, Angelica. How are
Hello,
you?
I'm back. I'm good.
Hey,
I'm good.
wonderful. Is there anything that our audience needs to know before we adjourn?
No, thank you so much, Pete, for this amazing session, Making It Rain with second level sales leadership. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. Again, the recording, key takeaways, resources, and Pete's awesome slide deck will be made available on the MSP website. And be sure to check out all the links that are sent in the chat. They will also be on that MSP landing page as well. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Pete.